This is how we can create and use fading and crossfading. Before we get started, make sure your multi-tool is selected. The multi-tool is selected when this bracket going above these three buttons here is clicked and everything is highlighted blue. Make sure your keyboard shortcuts for the timeline are selected by looking over here in this box labeled AZ and making sure it's highlighted yellow. We create fades to ease the transition from no sound to sound. When there are no fades, a lot of times transitions can seem rough and abrupt, like so. To smooth that transition, we can use fades. To create a fade, take your cursor and place it in the top left-hand corner or top right-hand corner of your clip. You'll see a little box display, and if you left-click and hold and drag in towards the clip, you will draw in a fade. As you can see, the transition from no sound to sound is significantly smoother. To delete the fade, take your cursor, place it in the bottom of the fade. You'll see a little hand icon. Click once, you'll see the fade highlight, and just simply hit delete. You can do this with all of your fades, and it won't affect any of your edits whatsoever. If you want to change the size of the fade, you can draw a fade in, and if we want that fade to be longer or shorter, take your cursor and place it on the inside of the fade so you see an inward facing bracket. Left click and hold, and then you can drag the fade to be longer or shorter. Until you get the results that you want. A second way you can create your fade is to take your selection tool up here in the top part of the clip, click one time to place your cursor, and then hit a keyboard shortcut. In this case, we're going to hit D to fade in, and we're going to hit G to fade out. You can resize the fades continually by placing your cursor somewhere and resizing the fade by hitting the corresponding shortcut key. A third way to create a fade is to take your selection tool, left click and hold, and drag the amount of time that you'd like to fade on your clip. Release the mouse and just type the F key. You can do this on both sides of the clip to fade both in and out. Create a selection, type F, and the fade is generated. These fades can be resized the same way the other fades can be resized, and they can be deleted in the exact same way. If your selection is only partially in the clip and not off the edge and you hit the F key, nothing will happen. The selection has to go off the edge of the clip, type F, and you have your fade. The shapes of these fades can be changed. If I create a fade and place my cursor in the middle of the fade, left click and hold, and drag either right or left, I can change whether or not the sound is coming in fairly quickly and tapering off at the end, or the sound takes a little bit longer to fade in, spiking a little bit near the end of the fade. You can hear the difference like this. Sound comes in a little faster. Sound comes in a little sharper. The default fade is a linear fade. These are the default shapes in Pro Tools. If you want to change the default shape of your fade, you can go to Setup, Preferences, Editing, and then choose the Fade In, Fade Out, or Crossfade buttons, and this allows you to click and hold and drag left or right to change the default shape of the fades when you initially draw them in. Click OK, and if I delete this fade and draw in a new one, you'll see the default shape is the original one used. You can use crossfades to ease the transition between two different clips. If I have these clips next to one another and play back the file, you'll see that the transition is fairly abrupt. You can create a crossfade by taking your cursor and placing it in the bottom right-hand corner or bottom left-hand corner of the clips that are connecting together on the timeline. If you left-click and hold and drag either right or left, you'll generate a crossfade. This is what the crossfade sounds like. Clearly the transition is smoother, but there is a slight dip in volume at the very center of the fade. Let's listen again. This may or may not be desirable. To change that, place your cursor in the bottom part of the fade. You should see a little hand. When you double click, the fade dialog box will pop up. Choose equal power, and that will change the shape of both of these fades at the same time. Click OK, and you'll see the corresponding shape change has been applied, and when we listen to it now, there's no more dip in volume. You can change the shape of these fades in a similar manner by double-clicking in the bottom of the fade, and a similar box will open up. This is the exact same process as placing your cursor in the middle of the fade, clicking and dragging left and right. Like many things in Pro Tools, there are a number of ways to achieve any one goal. If you'd like to crossfade across tracks, doing that is pretty easy as well. So if you have one clip on one track and a second click on another, just drag the clips so that they're overlapping the amount of time that you'd like for them to crossfade. Then take your selection tool, left click, and drag the amount of time that they're crossfading over each other, and drag your cursor up so that both tracks are selected. Then just hit your F key, and you've essentially made a crossfade across both tracks. Now basically this is two separate fades, so if you want to change the shape of them, that has to be done independently. And that's how you crossfade across multiple tracks. You can use fades on ambient sound like this. These are more aesthetic fades, things that are pleasing to hear, but not necessarily solving any problems. We can also use fades to correct voice edits that we make as well. For this example, I want to remove the from the beginning of this sentence.
Morally, intellectually, and otherwise, and then
this clip can be a difficult edit.
Morally, intellectually,
because there's no pause between and morally. As such, it is for all intents and purposes one word. If I edit out the part of this clip,
morally, intellectually,
we'll see that the is gone, but morally starts rather abruptly. To fix this problem, we can use a fade. If we draw in a small fade to reshape the sound of the M in morally,
intellectually,
we'll see that the edit is significantly smoother. You want to be careful not to draw in a fade that's too big. Otherwise, you'll hear the whole phrase cascading in.
Morally, intellectually, and otherwise.
And while I can understand what's being said, it does sound unnatural and it does sound edited. So a large fade like this can be problematic. So when you do your fade, make sure you're not drawing the fade over words, but rather just over the cascading part of the M.
Morally, intellectually, and otherwise, and that's how you can use fades to correct speech edits.